Chapter 24, Section 2. The United States was entering a severe depression after the stock market crash of 1929. You could see the effects rather quickly. Stores were closing. Factories were stopping production. Unemployed were on the streets looking for jobs. They were described to be like ghosts that walk the street. If you were to look at the unemployed, 1929, the last decent year, 1.5 million unemployed, which it wasn't too bad. But in 1933, it's up to 15 million. And different cities had different percentages. Chicago had almost half of their workforce unemployed. Toledo, Ohio had 80% unemployed. And just because you kept your job didn't mean that you didn't struggle as well. People's wages drop, sometimes as low as 10 cents an hour. And the average yearly income of a family goes down as well. 1929, it was $703 per year, and you were doing all right at that. But 1933, it's $375 per year. Some companies tried to avoid laying off their experienced employees. For example, General Electric, their employees, sometimes they only worked one day a week, but it kept them from having to lay people off. But as a family, it left you with very little income. Immigration goes down a lot. I mean, wages were low. There weren't the jobs anymore. You know, wages and jobs, that's what attracted people here in the first place. If you were African American, you faced a lot of difficulty. I mean, you already had to deal with the racial discrimination, but African Americans were hit with the layoffs first. Last ones hired, yet they were the first ones fired. Women in the workforce, on the other hand, women actually went up in the 30s. You could hire women for less than you could men. And you actually had some people believe that since millions of men were out of work and millions of women had jobs, simply fire the women and give the jobs to the men who should have the jobs anyway. So there are people that actually believe that. People had to resort to different means to earn money and keep some self-worth. And one of the popular things you're going to see people do was selling apples. You could sell an apple for a nickel. On a good day, you might make $1.15. And by the fall of 1930, a year into this, there were something like 6,000 people, unemployed people, selling apples. The President, Hoover, even commented on it. He said, people have left jobs for the more profitable job of selling apples. People didn't have a choice. The federal government's going to do very little to help the people in the city. To get help, you're going to have to rely on the city government, religious groups, charities, things like that. You know, neighbors would help out when they could. In Mexican American communities, you would see mutualistas form to help each other out. In Chinese American communities, you actually saw barrels of rice set out in the open. So that way people didn't have to ask for a handout. They could walk by and get some rice to feed their family and not have to worry about their pride. The simple idea of trying to feed your family became a serious daily struggle. You're going to see breadlines form where people could get handouts of soup and bread. It was estimated in the New York school system, 1 in 5 children suffer from malnutrition. Americans who grew up during this time period, they suffered long-term health effects. Problems with their teeth, problems with their eyes, as they grew older because of growing up in this era where they maybe didn't get the nutrition they needed. Homelessness was a serious problem. You can't pay rent or the mortgage, so you're evicted. 1932, it was estimated that 250,000 Americans lost their homes. New York City in Central Park, you even had one family that moved into a cave in Central Park. But people are going to start gathering in shanty towns. These collections of makeshift shelters built out of scraps started appearing outside of most cities. They get nicknamed Hoovervilles because people blamed Hoover for not fixing the problems. You also saw Hoover blankets, which were newspapers. You saw Hoover flag, which was an empty pocket turned inside out to show how little money you had. The Depression does not just affect people in the cities. Farmers were already struggling. As the European markets recovered after World War I, farm markets were already down. Farm income in 1929, the last year before the Depression, was $6 billion across the country. By 1932, it's a third of that. And as a farmer, the natural thing to do is, if you need more money, is you grow more. Problem is, you're growing more, it's going to contribute to the surplus, which then means prices drop even farther. The poverty in the city made it so that people could not afford to buy what the farmers were selling. Farmers couldn't they couldn't sell their crops. They couldn't sell their livestock. You literally had crops rotting in the field. You had animals being slaughtered in order to avoid having to feed them. Meanwhile, in the cities, you had people starving. Farmers can't pay their mortgages. Banks had to foreclose on farms. Now, some communities actually got together to fight the foreclosures. If a bank foreclosed on a farm, the bank didn't want to be in the farming business. The bank wanted to be in the bank business, the money business. So they're going to take that farm and they're going to sell it. And they're going to have this auction. And at this auction, what ended up starting to happen was neighbors would come in and they would bid these super low prices. For example, you got plows, brand new plows selling for $1/4. You got a $800 mortgage on a farm selling for $1.90. And then those neighbors would give the farm back to the family, and the bank would have no say over it. You did it because next month it could be you. This actually becomes such a problem because it caused Iowa banned foreclosure sales in 1933 because this was not helping anything. Tenant farmers in the South faced particularly bad poverty. They were already struggling when times were good. And now they're struggling even more. A lot of tenant farmers raised cotton. 1929, cotton was selling for 16 cents a pound. You were poor at that price. And then in 1931, it's 6 cents a pound. And then throw in some harvests that weren't good. Many of the tenant farmers are forced off the land. You've got migrant farmers in the Southwest that were hurt also. Many of them were from Mexico. They had immigrated from Mexico. And some people actually believe that we could ease this strain if we just sent all these migrant farmers back to Mexico. Colorado illegally orders their sheriffs to go to the Colorado-New Mexico border to stop workers, mostly Mexican, from entering Colorado. Some Mexican workers in Colorado are sent to the Colorado border and told, you're not welcome in Colorado. Some people of Mexican descent are forced to leave the country. In the 1930s, 500,000 people were forced to Mexico. Some of them had been born here and they were U.S. citizens. The ones who remained faced discrimination and hard conditions as the Depression kept getting